My name is Celine. At my mom's birthday, I sat on a folding chair by the kitchen door, while my sister raised her glass, called me the leftover, and my parents laughed. But that humiliation, it was just the loudest echo of a lifetime spent erased, excluded, forgotten. What they didn't know was that a year later they'd be front row, forced to applaud the daughter they once tried to destroy. And I didn't just survive. I rose. Before we dive in, have you ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to love you most? Drop a comment below. I'm listening. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, but stayed sitting there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. The late May sun warmed the white siding of the house, the green shutters, the familiar oak tree Dad had planted the year Callista was born, all exactly as I'd left it. Perfect from the outside, hollow on the inside. The faint murmur of laughter floated through the air from the backyard. I stared at the front door, the photo collage balanced carefully on the passenger seat beside me. I'd spent hours piecing it together. Birthdays, school plays, forgotten afternoons frozen in photographs no one but me seemed to remember. I knew better, but some foolish part of me still whispered, maybe this time will be different. I grabbed the gift and made my way up the walkway, the spring air thick with the smell of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke. I pasted a polite smile onto my face as I pushed open the door and stepped inside. "Celine's here!" Mom's voice rang out, light and brittle, like she was announcing the arrival of a neighbor's lost dog. A few heads turned, weak smiles, nods. And then, just as quickly, everyone went back to Callista, who was laughing about some promotion she'd snagged in Chicago. I set the gift down gently on the side table, next to a stack of designer shopping bags and expensive-looking wine. My homemade collage looked almost childish beside them. "Grab a drink if you want, hun," Dad said over his shoulder, not bothering to come greet me. I nodded stiffly, making my way to the kitchen. I poured a small glass of wine, my hand trembling slightly, and drifted toward the edge of the living room, invisible in plain sight. Callista, golden as ever, held court from the couch. Her laugh floated above the crowd, syrupy and effortless. I tried to blend in, to nod at the right moments, to smile just enough. It was the same dance I'd been doing for years, the art of not taking up too much space. The gifts were unwrapped while I stood at a distance. Mom cooed over the designer handbag from Callista, the spa voucher from my aunt. When she got to mine, she paused. "Oh, family photos. That's nice," she said, barely glancing at it before tucking it behind her chair like an afterthought. The moment slid by like a knife across skin, shallow, almost invisible, but I felt the sting anyway. Dad clinked his glass for a toast. Everyone gathered loosely, raising their drinks. "To Vera, the heart of this family," he boomed. Cheers erupted. "And to Callista," Mom added, raising her glass proudly. "Our golden girl." Callista laughed, basking in the attention, and then, with a tipsy grin that cut sharper than any blade, she said loudly enough for the entire room, "And to Celine, the leftover we somehow forgot to throw out." The world seemed to tilt sideways. There was a beat of silence, just long enough to feel like a slap, before Mom burst out laughing. Dad followed. A few cousins chuckled awkwardly. No one spoke. No one looked at me. I stood there frozen, the rim of my wineglass pressing into my palm. I forced a small smile, automatic, brittle. Dinner was announced a few minutes later. I moved with the herd, each step feeling heavier than the last. I scanned the dining table. Name cards were neatly arranged around the polished oak surface. Dad, Mom, Callista, Uncle Vince, Aunt Marla. At the very end, half hidden by the swinging kitchen door, I found it, Celine. There, waiting for me, was a flimsy folding chair, the kind you drag out for garage sales or funerals. My name was scrawled hastily on a cheap paper place card. No one looked up as I sat down, balancing my plate awkwardly on my lap, my back pressed against the cool wall, half in the kitchen, half out of sight. I watched them, laughing, sharing inside jokes, passing dishes heavy with casseroles and roasts, as if through thick glass. Callista recounted her downtown condo purchase. Dad bragged about his fishing trip. Mom swooned over Callista's prom pictures from 15 years ago. My name was never mentioned, not once. I picked at my food, the smells of baked ham and buttered rolls suddenly nauseating. My stomach twisted itself into knots. Memories surged. Recitals skipped because Callista had a soccer game, birthdays forgotten because of work dinners, awards barely acknowledged because Callista had a bigger trophy to show off. Maybe I was the leftover. Not out of malice, maybe just out of habit. The cake came out, candles flickering, voices raised in a raucous version of Happy Birthday. I mouthed the words, unseen. When the last candle was blown out, the family gathered for photos. Flash after flash captured a family I was no longer part of. I looked to the seat beside me, empty. Just a folding chair and a discarded napkin. That was when something inside me broke, not with a bang, but with a quiet, seismic shift, like the first subtle cracks in a frozen lake, invisible until it's too late. They hadn't saved me a seat, not at the table, not in the family, not even in their hearts. I gripped the cold metal sides of the folding chair, feeling it bite into my skin. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. I was done. While the party raged on without me, something inside me had quietly snapped. The moment I stepped out into the cool night air, the noise of the party became a dull hum behind me. I clutched my car keys tight in my hand, the metal biting into my palm, grounding me as I moved briskly down the driveway toward my car. "I'm just not feeling well," I had lied to Mom when I excused myself a few minutes ago. She hadn't even blinked, just waved a dismissive hand and turned back to the group, already absorbed in a new story Callista was telling. I wasn't sure if the lie was for her or for me. Sliding behind the wheel, I sat there for a moment, the stillness of the car pressing against my skin. The house glowed behind me, warm and alive, a hive I was never really part of. I turned the key, pulled out of the driveway, and disappeared into the soft folds of the night. It didn't take long to get back to my small, one-bedroom apartment in town. A modest walk-up, tucked behind a shuttered bookstore and a closed-down diner. The kind of place no one from my family would ever set foot in. Too small, too real, too forgettable. Inside, I dropped my purse onto the kitchen counter and leaned against the sink, staring out the window into the dark alley beyond. I thought I'd feel relief being away from them. I didn't. If anything, the silence made the cracks inside me feel even wider. Restless, I kicked off my heels and padded into the living room, the floor cool against my bare feet. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't think straight. Every laugh, every averted gaze from the party replayed in my mind like a cruel highlight reel. I grabbed my phone, more out of habit than need, and began scrolling. A mindless, desperate attempt to distract myself. That's when I saw it. Callista had already posted on social media, a bright, polished photo from the party. The whole family gathered around Mom, grinning, glasses raised high. Everyone tagged, Mom, Dad, cousins, even the neighbors who had dropped by for dessert. Everyone but me. My heart thudded once, painfully. I looked closer. There I was, barely, a sliver of my arm and half my face cut off on the very edge of the frame, like an accident, like an afterthought. Beneath the photo, the caption read, "The whole family together again." The words hit harder than any insult that night, not just ignored, erased. I swallowed the sharp sting rising in my throat and set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands against them. It was one thing to feel invisible. It was another to see it in black and white for the whole world to agree. The phone buzzed again. A notification. Family group chat. I hesitated. I barely opened that thread anymore. It was usually filled with weekend plans I wasn't invited to, or photos from Callista's endless achievements. But some stupid, fragile part of me still hoped. I tapped it open. The conversation was already buzzing. Uncle Vince. "Such a great night. Vera, you did amazing as always." Aunt Marla. "Callista looked stunning as usual. A real shining star." Cousin Jenna. "Glad all the important people were there." Someone else chimed in. "Next time, let's not bring the extra baggage, lol." I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. No one corrected them. No one said, "Hey, Celine's part of the family too." Not Mom, not Dad, no one. I set the phone down slowly, my hands trembling slightly, not from anger, but from something colder, something emptier. It wasn't a shock, not really, more like a confirmation of everything I had tried for years to explain away, to rationalize, to forgive. When even silence becomes a weapon, you learn that invisibility is not peace, It's punishment. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, the only sounds the distant rumble of a passing train and the soft tick of the wall clock. Hours passed. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the laughter from earlier seeped back in, vivid and merciless. At some point past midnight, I gave up pretending. I lay flat on my back, staring up at the cracked ceiling, the paint peeling in small curls, the spiderweb of fractures growing wider every year, kind of like my relationship with my family. Something shifted in me again that night. Not an explosion, not a tearful declaration, just a quiet, deadly certainty. I could not keep waiting for them to love me the way I deserved. I had to stop hoping they would see me. I had to see myself. For the first time, the thought didn't scare me. It calmed me. I wasn't planning an act of revenge, not yet. I was planning my own escape, not to run away, to finally run toward myself. The sky outside began to lighten, a soft gray bleeding into the black. Birds chirped half-heartedly, uncertain whether it was truly dawn or just a trick of the cold spring night. I swung my legs off the couch and sat up. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning sunlight poured through the thin curtains of my apartment, splashing uneven streaks across the floor. I stood in the center of the living room, suitcase open at my feet, neatly folding clothes into careful stacks. It was almost funny how ritualistic it felt, like packing for a vacation I hadn't planned, to a place that didn't quite exist yet. I had decided. I was leaving Des Moines. Not far yet, maybe just to a neighboring town, but far enough to put real distance between me and everything that had quietly corroded me from the inside out. As I zipped the suitcase closed, a thought snagged at me. A jacket. I had left my favorite navy jacket draped over a chair at Mom's house during the party. It wasn't expensive, but it was mine. And after everything else they had taken from me, I wasn't about to let them have this too. Reluctantly, I grabbed my keys and headed out, promising myself I wouldn't stay long. In and out. No conversations, no letting old wounds bleed again. The drive was mercifully short, the street still empty in the early Sunday quiet. I pulled into the same spot I had parked yesterday, killing the engine but letting my hands linger on the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary. Just grab the jacket and go. The front door was unlocked, like always. I stepped inside without knocking, half hoping, half dreading that I might bump into someone. But the house was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. It was almost eerie, walking through the aftermath of a party. Balloons drooping from the ceiling, a few crumpled napkins littering the floor, half-empty glasses abandoned on side tables. The house smelled faintly of leftover food and wilting flowers. I found my jacket slung over the back of a chair in the dining room. I grabbed it quickly, stuffing it under my arm, ready to make my exit. And then I saw it. On my way toward the door, I passed the kitchen. Something odd caught my eye. A flash of familiar colors in the trash can, half hidden beneath greasy paper plates and crumpled napkins. I took a step closer. It was my gift. The framed family photo collage I had spent weeks assembling. Every late night, every careful photo selection, every moment stitched together with quiet hope, tossed away like garbage. For a long moment, I just stared at it, the frame smeared with bits of frosting and chicken grease. My heart thudded heavily, a slow, dragging beat that echoed in my ears. No anger, not yet. Just that cold, hollow ache, like a hole had been punched clean through my chest. I bent down slowly, fingers brushing against the sticky glass, and pulled it out of the trash. It wasn't salvageable. The frame was cracked in one corner. Smudges and stains marred the pictures inside. It didn't matter. I tucked it under my arm, jacket and all, and straightened up. Before I could leave, my gaze caught on the wall above the fireplace. A new photo had been hung there overnight. Fresh, polished, expensive looking. A framed print of the group photo from the party, the one Callista had posted on social media. They must have printed it early this morning, so proud to immortalize the night. I stepped closer, my mouth tightening into a grim line. There they were, Mom, Dad, Callista, the cousins, all lined up perfectly, smiling, radiant under the fairy light strung across the backyard pergola. And me? A blurry figure at the very edge, half cut off, standing awkwardly like I had stumbled into the shot by accident. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had edited me out. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply stared at that photo, burning every detail into my mind, not out of hatred, but out of clarity. A reminder, a warning. When someone shows you where you belong in their story, believe them. I turned away from the living room and headed back toward the front door, my footsteps muffled against the worn carpet. As I opened the door, a memory washed over me with cruel vividness. A birthday party when I was 8 years old. The cake had Callista's name spelled in pink icing across it, even though it was supposed to be a joint party. No one even noticed when my name wasn't there. Or the science fair when I won second place at school. I had stood proudly beside my project board, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. No one came. Dad was at Callista's dance recital. Mom had a migraine. But when Callista got a participation trophy for a spelling bee, the whole family threw a barbecue in her honor. Always the extra piece, the spare chair, the unplanned guest. I wasn't forgotten by accident, I realized, my hand tightening around the damaged photo frame. I was erased on purpose. The realization didn't come with a sting. It came with a strange, clean sense of peace. I stepped outside into the bright morning air, letting the door swing closed behind me. No more hoping. No more trying to fit into a puzzle that was never missing me to begin with. As I drove back to my apartment, the photo frame resting on the passenger seat like a wounded bird, I made a silent vow. They could keep their curated memories. I would start building my own. The morning air was heavy with the kind of stillness that feels unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I sat at the small kitchen counter of my apartment, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring out the window at a world that had moved on without me. Nothing outside had changed. Cars still trickled past. The sun still bathed the sidewalks in soft light. But inside me, something fundamental had shifted. Quietly. Irrevocably. I had spent the early dawn hours packing away the last pieces of my hope into that battered suitcase. Not running away, but finally, truly, walking away from the battlefield I'd been clinging to all my life. I wasn't just leaving them behind. I was stepping toward myself. With a steely focus, I opened my laptop, heart pounding harder than it should. I wasn't applying to escape anymore. I was applying to build. Scrolling through listings, one title caught my eye and refused to let go. Director of Community Engagement at the Heartland Alliance. A real organization. A real chance. I updated my resume, pouring every ounce of truth into my cover letter. No embellishments, no apologies, just me, unfiltered, unafraid. Before I could overthink it, I hit submit. 3 days later, I stood in the lobby of their downtown office, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my navy blazer. The interview unfolded like a dream. Questions that mattered, genuine laughter, a handshake that felt like a promise. When they said they'd be in touch after final checks, I left with a lightness I hadn't known in years. Maybe it's finally my turn, I thought, the words almost too fragile to say out loud. For a few days, hope bloomed cautiously inside me, a wildflower cracking through concrete. Then came the email. After careful consideration and feedback received during background checks, the words blurred on the screen. I read them twice, 3 times, as if repetition could change their meaning. Concern? Feedback? I knew that flavor of rejection too well. It was the taste of something rotten, whispered where I couldn't defend myself. Without hesitating, I messaged Erin, an old contact from a community project. She called back that afternoon, her voice wrapped in careful sympathy. Celine, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but someone close to your family raised flags, said you were unstable, difficult. It felt like a slap I should have seen coming, but knowing didn't soften the blow. They hadn't just closed the door behind me. They had barricaded it, nailed it shut, and hung a warning sign. I thanked Erin numbly, ending the call. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. I sat there, staring into the middle distance, letting the betrayal bleed through my chest, dark and cold. But the world wasn't finished sharpening its knives. 2 weeks later, I stumbled onto the final cut. Scrolling through local news updates one sleepless night, I saw it. A press release announcing the finalists for the city's Heart of Service Award. There was Callista's name, big, bold, untouchable. And mine? Nowhere. I stared at her smiling face on the screen, holding a plaque she hadn't earned, basking in applause that should have belonged to someone who had bled for it. They hadn't just stolen my moments, they had rewritten the narrative entirely. I closed the laptop gently, as if afraid it might shatter in my hands. In a way, something had shattered. And maybe it needed to. That night, I found myself sitting behind the wheel of my car, parked along an empty side street lined with flickering streetlights. My fingers gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked under my fists. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there, breathing through the fury rising in my chest like a tide refusing to recede. For so long, I had fought for a seat at their table. For so long, I had begged them to see me, to hear me, to love me in ways they were never capable of. Not anymore. The wind outside rattled a loose street sign, a hollow clanging that sounded almost like laughter. I looked up at the night sky, a deep, endless black, and for the first time in my life, I understood something. They had tried to erase me because they needed to believe they were better, because my existence, unapologetic, unbought, was proof that love wasn't something they got to ration and sell. They had paved their golden road right through my name, but they had underestimated one thing. I was still standing, and now I was building. That night, staring into the vast dark from behind my windshield, I made a promise to myself. I would create something so undeniable, so blazing in its own truth, that no one, no lie, no betrayal, no polished smile, could ever erase me again. The promise I made to myself that night didn't come with fireworks or grand declarations. It came quietly, like the steady ticking of a clock after everyone else had fallen asleep. It was a resolve stitched together in the dark, thread by thread, each stitch tighter than the last. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into work like a woman possessed. I took on late shifts at the community center, led volunteer drives, stayed up till 2 a.m. writing grant proposals and designing new outreach programs. If there was an opportunity to build something meaningful, I threw my whole heart into it. I wasn't looking for validation anymore. I wasn't waiting for applause. Every action, every sleepless night, was a brick laid in the foundation of a life they couldn't touch. Most nights, the only sound in my apartment was the hum of my old fridge and the occasional creak of floorboards settling. Isolation wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a shield. One Thursday evening, after another 12-hour day, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, blinking at the email on my laptop. Congratulations! We are pleased to inform you that your nonprofit proposal has been awarded a $50,000 grant from the Embrace Iowa Foundation. For a few moments, I just stared at the screen, waiting for it to vanish like a mirage. When it didn't, when the words stayed real and solid and mine, a laugh bubbled up in my chest, sharp, disbelieving. I had done it, on my own. No shortcuts, no family name greasing the wheels, just me and the work. Against my better judgment, I pulled up the family group chat. A tiny part of me, fragile, foolish, still craved acknowledgement. Maybe, I thought, maybe this would be the thing they couldn't ignore. I typed out the news in a few short sentences, trying to keep my excitement in check. I hit send, and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. Finally, a notification blinked. Callista had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Nothing else. No words. No congratulations. No we're proud of you. Just a lazy flick of a thumb. I sat back in my chair, the initial rush of joy curdling into something bitter. Maybe I should have known better. But the universe wasn't done mocking me yet. Later that night, while absent-mindedly scrolling through social media to numb the sting, I stumbled onto a new post from my mother. A glowing message, complete with hearts and exclamation marks. So proud of our beautiful Callista and her inspiring journey with her beauty blog. You're an inspiration to this family. A beauty blog, not a grant that could change lives. Not community programs that would feed kids and shelter families. No, the family inspiration was Callista's curated selfies and lipstick reviews. I closed the app slowly, carefully, setting the phone down as if it might explode. The silence in my apartment felt heavier, almost physical, pressing against my ribs. That was when the package arrived. A small, neatly wrapped box sitting on my doorstep the next morning. Inside, a letter written in my father's stiff, formal handwriting. Dear Celine, we realize there have been misunderstandings in the past. We hope you can move past old resentments and remember that family is what matters most. Best wishes, Mom and Dad. It read like a note from a stranger, detached, hollow, sanitized of anything resembling real remorse. This wasn't an apology. It was a business transaction, an attempt to buy back my silence with a few insincere words. I sat at the kitchen counter, the letter trembling in my hand, the lump in my throat growing harder to swallow by the second. For a few dangerous minutes, old instincts clawed their way up. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I should be grateful they even bothered. But then I thought back to all the birthdays spent alone, the forgotten milestones, the moments of humiliation swallowed in the name of keeping the peace. And I realized something sharp and clear. Forgiveness offered out of convenience wasn't forgiveness. It was another form of control, another way to tell me, we decide when this ends, not you. I tore the letter in half, then into quarters, then into smaller pieces still, letting them flutter into the trash like broken promises. They didn't get to write the ending of my story. They didn't get to decide when I moved on. This time, I would choose for myself. And just when I thought I'd faced the worst of it, a letter from someone unexpected changed everything. The first cool breeze of fall snuck in through the kitchen window as I washed my coffee cup, the hum of the city barely audible beyond the clatter of the faucet. After weeks of pushing forward, of refusing to look back, I had settled into a steady, stubborn rhythm. Work, plan, build. I didn't expect anything anymore, least of all kindness. That's why the envelope caught me off guard. It was wedged neatly among the bills and flyers in my mailbox. The handwriting unmistakably familiar despite the years. Malcolm. I wiped my damp hands on my jeans and tore the envelope open right there on the cracked linoleum floor. The letter inside was short, written in Malcolm's no-nonsense scrawl. Celine, your work hasn't gone unnoticed. It never did, not by everyone. I've nominated you for the Midwest Changemakers Award. Your name deserves to be where it belongs. At the forefront, not in the shadows. Proud of you, always. M? I read it once, then again, then a third time, my fingers trembling slightly. Someone had seen me, had remembered me, had believed in me all along. It was almost too much to process. I pressed the letter flat against my chest for a moment, letting the words settle into the hollow places their indifference had carved out. Later that evening, as dusk deepened into night, I curled up in the worn armchair by my balcony door, Malcolm's letter still beside me on the end table. My phone buzzed, a private message. I hesitated before checking it, half expecting another backhanded comment from a distant cousin or a passive-aggressive, "hope you're well," from my mother. Instead, it was from Emily Rivers, a girl I hadn't spoken to since high school. Hey Celine, the message began. I know this is random, but I saw your community work online. I just wanted to say, I always knew you deserved better than what you got back then. They didn't deserve you then. They don't deserve you now. Just wanted you to know someone noticed. Tears blurred the screen, but this time they didn't sting. They cleansed. It wasn't the grand family applause I'd once craved. It was better. It was real. I set the phone down and leaned back, listening to the low hum of the city, feeling the pulse of something reawakening inside me. A different kind of strength, not built on acceptance, but on authenticity. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future not built on trying to claw my way back into their good graces. A future where the people who stood beside me did so because they saw me, not because they were bound to me by guilt or blood. Maybe the people who truly saw you weren't always your family. Maybe they were the ones who chose you, quietly, fiercely, without conditions. The Midwest Changemakers Award wasn't just another trophy. It was a door. And this time, I wouldn't be walking through it dragging the weight of their expectations behind me. I would accept the nomination, on my terms. No mentions of family lineage, no curated stories about Sunday barbecues and perfect Christmas mornings. Just the truth. Messy, raw, real, me. When the news broke that I was a finalist, I wasn't surprised who tried to slither back into my life first. The buzz started small. A few shares on local community pages, a blip on a local news station. Then, before I knew it, there it was. My name in bold, flashing across social media, tagged with words like Midwest Changemakers finalist and Community Impact Leader. I watched it unfold from my tiny living room, arms crossed tightly against my chest, heart beating somewhere between disbelief and cautious pride. I hadn't even finished reading the first few comments when my phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. Voicemail. Mom. I stared at it, heart sinking before I even pressed play. Her voice, sugary and overenthusiastic, crackled through the speaker. Sweetheart, oh my goodness, we are so proud of you. Knew you had it in you. Call us back, honey, let's celebrate. I let the message play out, face unreadable. I hadn't heard that voice in weeks, not since the silence that followed every other achievement that wasn't convenient for their narrative. Less than an hour later, another ding. Text from Callista. Hey, catch up, just us sisters, so proud of you. I stared at the emoji, the little coffee cup, the smiling face, as if it were a landmine. And then, like clockwork, Dad. A simple text. Proud of you. Hope you remember your family when you make it. The sudden affection wasn't love. It was calculation. They didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted to be seen celebrating me. I put the phone down and went back to folding laundry, methodically smoothing each piece. No explosions, no angry tears, just a heavy, steady knowing. Later that evening, after dodging 3 more calls and 2 more just checking in texts, I finally relented. Callista's persistence wore me down, not because I believed she meant it, but because a part of me needed to hear it for myself, needed to see if they were still who I remembered them to be. We met at a trendy little coffee shop downtown, the kind where the cups were compostable and the baristas wore beanies year-round. I arrived early, out of habit, chose a table near the window, facing the door, ordered a plain coffee, no frills. Callista breezed in 10 minutes late, designer bag swinging from her elbow, oversized sunglasses perched on her head despite the cloudy day. Celine! She cried out as if we were long-lost best friends. Heads turned. She leaned in for a hug, the kind that barely touched shoulders. I sat back down, sipping my coffee, letting her chatter fill the space between us. You look amazing, she gushed, fluttering her manicured fingers. Seriously, so happy for you. Midwest Changemaker, that's huge. I smiled politely, letting her run the script. She ordered a latte, extra foam, extra shot, then launched into a whirlwind update about her makeup blog, her partnership with some niche brand, her plans to maybe move to a bigger city, depending on how things go. I nodded, murmuring appropriate sounds at the right moments, feeling every second stretch thinner. Then, as she stirred her latte with one perfectly manicured pinky, she slid into it. So, the big speech coming up, she said lightly, flashing a rehearsed smile. Are you gonna, mention the family? You know, bring a little honor back to Mom and Dad? They're so excited. Everyone's watching. It would mean a lot. There it was. They didn't care about me. They cared about what my success could erase. The humiliation, the whispers, the way neighbors had started noticing the cracks in the Golden family facade. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her squirm a little in her seat. That's something to think about, I said finally, voice even, betraying nothing. She brightened instantly, mistaking my restraint for agreement. It would just be so good for everyone, she chirped. You know, family first and all that. Family first. The same family that had tucked me by the kitchen door, forgotten my birthdays, erased my name from recognition, lied about me to silence my future. Funny how they only remembered you when you were useful. I sipped my coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. In my mind, I wasn't sitting across from my sister anymore. I was sitting across from a mirror, reflecting every time I had swallowed pain in exchange for a scrap of approval. Not this time. I didn't argue, I didn't accuse, I just smiled. Because inside, a different speech was already taking shape. A speech not written for them. A speech that honored the invisible battles, the lonely nights, the quiet strength it took to survive them. A speech for the girl they had tried to erase, and the woman she had become. We finished the coffee meeting with shallow promises to keep in touch. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, feeling lighter. clearer. The game had changed, and this time I was the one setting the rules. But they didn't know I had planned a different kind of speech. A speech not meant to honor them, but to honor the truth. The night of the ceremony arrived under a velvet sky scattered with stars. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple dark green dress that hugged my frame with quiet confidence. No loud colors, no glitter, just strength stitched into every line and seam. In the mirror, I caught my own eyes. Steady, clear. There was a calmness there I hadn't seen in years. Tonight wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about claiming my own life, my own worth, in front of the very people who had once decided I didn't matter. I tucked the folded speech into my clutch and headed out, my heels clicking sharply against the cracked pavement outside my apartment. Each step felt heavier, more deliberate, like I was walking toward a version of myself that had been waiting a long, long time. The community center was buzzing when I arrived. Laughter spilling onto the sidewalk, bouquets tucked under arms, flashes from camera phones lighting the entrance. Inside, rows of white chairs lined up neatly in front of a modest stage draped in navy and gold banners. I checked in at the front desk. A volunteer smiled warmly, handed me a program, and pointed me toward the reserved seating. And there they were, front row, center. My parents sat side by side, smiling and greeting people like small-town royalty. Dad in his pressed suit, Mom in pearls and a pastel jacket that screamed, "Supportive Mother." Callista perched elegantly next to them, her phone in hand, no doubt ready to document every moment that could be spun into a shining family portrait. Their heads turned when they spotted me. Mom's smile widened painfully. She waved with exaggerated warmth. Dad gave a sharp nod, the kind he used when closing a business deal. Callista lifted her hand in a lazy half-wave before going back to her phone. I didn't wave back. I simply moved to my assigned seat 3 rows behind them, among strangers who clapped for me because of what I had done, not because of what they wanted from me. The ceremony unfolded in a blur of speeches, awards, and polite applause. I barely heard any of it. I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, feeling the folded paper of my speech press against my palm like a heartbeat. Finally, the host approached the microphone with a wide smile. And now, our final honoree of the night, someone whose tireless work and unwavering heart have changed the lives of so many in our community. Please welcome Celine Davenport. Applause filled the room. I rose slowly, steadying myself, and made my way to the podium. The lights were bright, the faces blurred. I could make out the front row, Mom beaming, Dad leaning forward, Callista angling herself just so for the perfect photo. I unfolded my speech, smoothing it flat on the podium, took a breath, and began. Thank you all for being here tonight. I am deeply honored, more than I can put into words, to stand here among people who believe in the quiet power of service, of unseen battles fought with heart and grit. My voice carried clear and steady through the hall. I want to thank the communities who allowed me to stand beside them, to listen, to learn, to serve. I want to thank Malcolm Thompson, who saw in a 19-year-old volunteer something worth nurturing when others only saw a shadow. Malcolm smiled proudly from a few rows back, his eyes glistening. And tonight, I want to dedicate this recognition to those who taught me the most powerful lesson of all, that family is not defined by who shares your blood, but by who recognizes your soul. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. In the front row, I saw it happen. The stiffening of my mother's shoulders, the clench of my father's jaw, the frozen half-smile slipping from Callista's lips. They couldn't protest. Not here, not now. I hadn't named them, but I hadn't needed to. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood. The cracks in the facade they had spent so long polishing were visible now, deep, undeniable. I closed my speech with a simple thank you, stepped back from the microphone, and accepted the standing ovation with a slight bow of my head. Thunderous applause thundered through the hall, loudest from those who mattered, quietest from those who didn't. As I stepped down from the stage, I caught sight of my family again. Mom was clapping, but her face was tight and pale. Dad stared straight ahead, unmoving. Callista clapped with slow, brittle hands, her mouth pressed into a thin line. I passed them without a glance. They waved, frantic little motions of desperation. I walked past them, past the rows of strangers who clapped for the truth I had finally spoken aloud, out into the crisp night air. For the first time in a long time, I felt no weight dragging at my ankles, no invisible leash tugging at my choices. I stood under the stars, breathing deeply, the coolness biting my lungs in the best way. I had done it. I had survived them. I had freed myself without screaming, without fighting, by simply telling the truth. And it was more powerful than any weapon they had ever wielded. I thought walking away would be the hardest part. I didn't realize the real freedom was yet to come. The morning after the ceremony was unnervingly still. No congratulations echoed off the walls. No bustling voices filled the air. Just sunlight pouring through the thin curtains of my apartment and the quiet hum of a life finally free of invisible chains. For the first time in years, I woke up without a pit in my stomach. No expectations pressing down, no guilt whispering at the edge of my thoughts, just space. Wide, terrifying, beautiful space. I made coffee and sat on the edge of my bed, cradling the mug between my palms, staring out at the modest skyline of our little town. The same streets, the same buildings, but everything looked different now. Or maybe I was finally seeing clearly. By mid-morning, the messages started trickling in. First, a text from Mom. "We're proud of you, even if you didn't mention us." I stared at the screen, feeling no urge to reply. It wasn't anger that kept my thumb still, it was clarity. I saw the words for what they were. Another performance, another attempt to tug at strings that no longer existed. A few hours later, Callista chimed in. "You know you really hurt Mom's feelings last night. Hope you're happy." There it was. The guilt card, played right on schedule. I read the message once, my heart utterly unmoved, and then I deleted both texts without a second thought. No explanations, no arguments, no long-winded justifications. The days that followed were a strange blend of liberation and bittersweet ache. I kept busy. More invitations to speak at local events, more offers to join nonprofit initiatives across the Midwest. Opportunities bloomed like wildflowers after a long, brutal winter. One gray afternoon, while setting up my new office at the Alliance headquarters, I opened a box labeled Personal and found it, the family photo collage I had once gifted my mother. The same one I'd fished out of their trash can like a forgotten receipt. I sat back in my chair, holding it in my hands. It didn't sting like it used to. I traced the edges of the old photographs with a steady finger, remembering the girl in them. The one who still believed she could earn love by working hard enough, being good enough. I didn't hang the collage. Instead, I wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and tucked it into the bottom drawer of my desk. Not to bury it, not out of anger, but to acknowledge it as part of my story. One that no longer had the power to define me. Not every chapter needs to be burned. Some just need to be closed. Weeks later, Malcolm invited me to a small dinner party, along with a few colleagues and their families. Nothing grand, just laughter, simple food, a backyard strung with fairy lights. I was nervous at first. Old habits die hard. But as the evening unfolded, I found myself laughing. Real laughter, the kind that bubbles up from a place untouched by fear or judgment. No one asked me about my family. No one measured my worth against anyone else's. I was simply Celine, and that was enough. Toward the end of the night, sitting in a circle of new friends, sipping a glass of sweet tea under the wide Iowa sky, I realized this was what home felt like. It wasn't the bloodline. It wasn't the shared last names. It was the space where you could exhale fully and be seen without having to beg for it. Late that night, I walked back to my apartment, heels dangling from one hand, the crisp fall air nipping at my cheeks. I stepped onto my tiny balcony, curled up in the old chair by the railing, and let the silence wrap around me like a warm blanket. I thought of the folding chair by the kitchen door, the one where they had stuck me like an afterthought at Mom's birthday party. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with something close to gratitude, because that empty chair had taught me something more valuable than any inheritance ever could. I didn't need anyone to save me a seat. I had built my own table, and everyone sitting at it now was there because they chose me, and because I chose myself first. The stars stretched wide above me, vast and unbothered. I sipped my tea and leaned back, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, piece by piece, breath by breath. Have you ever walked away from a place that once defined you, only to realize you never belonged there in the first place? Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight in silence, the ones where walking away feels like losing everything, but is actually where real freedom begins. Family doesn't always mean love. Sometimes it simply means history. If you've ever had to choose peace over blood ties, you are not alone. What would you have done in my shoes? I'd love to hear your story in the comments.